If you wanted to distill everything that Sibelius was about as a composer into one symphony, or at least everything he was about as a symphony composer, it's all there in the seventh. In less than 23 minutes, one movement, you have this astonishing organic growth, a piece that rises and falls in one great arch like a wave. And you can feel elements of slow movement, fast movement, development, recapitulation, but it's all just part of this glorious happening, centered on this wonderfully noble trombone theme, which does sound like a grand farewell to life, an immensely dignified farewell to life. Perhaps deep within himself, Sibelius knew that he just couldn't go on much longer. He was at this stage now where he was having to rely so heavily on alcohol to keep him going that sometimes his wife would find him the next morning collapsed with an empty bottle of scotch in front of him. As a summing up, well, I don't think you can listen to the end of this symphony in which the trombone theme, as it were, falls to rest, and there's this magnificent rock-like final cadence, without feeling that this just makes the most splendid end to a great symphonic cycle, to a great mega journey. This is the final installment as well as being a terrific work in its own right. In the case of Richard Strauss, definitely he saw these last works, these last songs, as a summing up of all that he'd done really in many ways. His love for Mozart, his love for romanticism, his love for the soprano voice, all of it went into that, and particularly his love for his wife, this extraordinary partnership with the singer-wife Pauline Dana. On one occasion he's supposed to have said, "My wife's a bit rough, but she's what I need." She clearly was what he needed, and they were very close indeed. And there's nothing in music more touching than the final song in the cycle, where the singer contemplates what it will be like when we two are gone, and you hear two piccolos trilling in the distance like the sound of two larks, possibly the souls of the composer and his wife floating off into the distance. And then there is that extraordinarily touching line, "Is this perhaps death?" in the very end of the last song, surrounded in music which is so full of acceptance. Sadness, yes, but wonderful acceptance. This has been a very full life. And this is a man who, despite the horrors, particularly of the Second World War, is grateful for what he's experienced and is expressing it, I think, very touchingly in music. You could say that in PR terms, Tchaikovsky's death very shortly after the first performance of his Pathétique symphony was a gift to the work's posthumous reputation. This is a work which ends with a movement which Tchaikovsky in his sketches called Death, and which has an unmistakable ebbing away into nothing. This music of intense poignancy, a sense of loss, of tragedy, of farewell, and this agonized final moment where you could almost hear the heartbeat in the basses dying in the bass. It's a truly extraordinary moment, and when you know that Tchaikovsky died shortly afterwards, and we know of all the myths associated with his death, that he was terrified allegedly of his homosexuality being exposed and had drunk unboiled tap water in cholera-infested Leningrad as a way out, which seems a bit unlikely, doesn't it? And you also have to bear in mind that this is a man who had been obsessed with death since he was a boy. So many of his great pieces end with images of death. Romeo and Juliet, for instance, the Manfred Symphony. These are all works that are just full of that spirit. And it might be, if he'd gone on to write another symphony or more symphonies, that we'd see the end of the Pathétique as yet another stage in this development, this lifelong obsession. It may be just coincidence that the Pathétique was followed by Tchaikovsky's untimely and tragic demise. But if so, it was a remarkably profitable coincidence for the symphony. It certainly hasn't done anything to decrease its reputation. And it is difficult sometimes when you listen to the beginning of that symphony with that incredible, hollow, skeletal sounding bassoon solo with just the double basses underneath, to think, the man who knew this well, he had some idea. He must have had some idea. He had the kind of mind that was always buzzing around death like a wasp around a jam jar, fascinated by this subject. You could call it morbid if you like, but the result is this staggeringly wonderful music.